yes. God said everything was very good. You can't apply that to a poodle, right? See, God made the original dog, but a poodle is the result of sin. But we'll talk about that a little later on. Now, then they have this statement here. They say, but Darwin's work support the view that all living things have developed into forms we see today by a process of gradual change. This is what is meant by evolution. And then they go through and they show you a picture like this. And basically they're saying, look at these dogs. And they have models of dogs. See all the changes in dogs? And then they show you weasels. And they say, see all the changes in weasels? In fact, when my wife and I stood before this display, we had a mystical experience because we read this sign and it meant so much to us. When weasels breed together, they produce more weasels like themselves. It was just incredible, just incredible. But anyway, they go through all of this and then they say, look at this, changes in dogs, changes in weasels and so on. And then at the end they say, there it is, the evidence for evolution. As my wife said, did we miss something? Now, let me explain all this to you, because let's use dogs to explain these changes. You see, let's assume there were two dogs to start with. All scientists, Christian and non-Christian, agree that all dogs are the same kind. So we start with two dogs who fall in love, get married, and have kids, okay? And then they end up having lots of dogs. Now, I went to public school, as you can see, but here's the thing. People say, okay, I can see that we get lots of dogs, but how do you get all those different species, varieties, dingoes, wolves, and so on? Well, I'm going to do some basic genetics. Now, some of you might say, I don't like genetics, I've never studied genetics. Look, if you got married and had kids, you've studied genetics, so don't worry about that. And it's much more complicated than this. We're just looking at basic principles. You know how you learn about big A, big B, little b, you know, in sexual reproduction, one set of genes from the male, one from the female, and then you get all these offspring, right? By the way, all those offspring there are what? Dogs. They're all a little different from each other. You notice that? You notice the one that has a little a's, little b's, little c's, lost the big A, big B, big C, so it doesn't have the same information as the parents, but it's got the right information to be a dog, right? And so what we can understand is, from a male and a female, you can get all these different varieties, all these different combinations, but they're still what? Dogs. And by the way, just to give you an idea of the amount of information in our genes, the number of atoms estimated in the known universe, the number of atoms in the known universe is something like 10 to the 80th power. That's a 1 followed by 80 zeros. The number of electrons estimated you can fit into the universe, something like 10 to the 130th power. But the number of children from two people, without having two the same, is like 10 to the 2017th power. Isn't that incredible variability that's on our genes? Phenomenal. And God put that in dog genes, cat genes, elephant genes, and so on. Now, let's take biblical history. Let's take the event of Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark lands in the Middle East, and two dogs hop off Noah's Ark. They fall in love, get married, and have kids again. And now we end up with lots of dogs. But this time, you imagine, you have an empty world, all the land animals were killed, and as the dog population builds up, you know what's going to happen? You're going to find that certain groups of dogs are going to break off from the others and move in different directions. In fact, we call that in biology the founder principle. And so what could happen is this. For instance, you can imagine if this group of dogs only had the big A, big B genes, and out here they had the little a, little b, if this group moved off on their own, then they've lost the little a, little b genes and can never regain them again unless they mix back with the original population. Now, let's apply that sort of practically so you understand. Sometimes genes act together like this. Here's an L and S gene together. L means long hair in dogs, S means short hair. Together they give medium fur length in dogs. Well, those that have all S genes have short hair, those that have L and S, medium fur length, those that have all L genes, long fur. You imagine if all those with the S genes died out of a population and you only left with long-haired dogs, you might never know they had ancestors that had medium fur length and relatives that had short hair. You see, what can happen is this. You imagine, after Noah's Ark, as some dogs move towards a cold climate, and this is what you call adaptation, right? Natural selection. Those that have genes for long hair survive better than those that have genes for short hair. You end up with long-haired dogs in a cold climate. You end up with short-haired dogs in a hot climate. That's not evolution. You know what that is? Dogs. You're just redistributing the genes. That's all we're doing. The information that was already there. You see, you look around the room. You're all a little different from each other, but you're all humans. Some of you have information for black hair, some for brown hair. A lot of you don't have information for hair. But actually you do, obviously. It's just you're more like poodles, and that's the problem. But Now, what happens naturally in the environment, we do it artificially. It's called artificial selection. You've heard of artificial selection, haven't you? We look at this dog and say we're going to breed it with this one and separate it from these, and so on. We end up with our domestic varieties of dogs. But all these domestic varieties of dogs, by the way, when you look at them, these domestic varieties of dogs, well, they're all different. They're all a little different from each other. In fact, some of them look very different from each other, don't they? But they're still what? Look at them. They're all still dogs, aren't they? Absolutely. They're all still dogs. Now, what I want you to understand, though, is this process is a process of a loss of information. You even get to the stage where there's not a lot of information left, okay? There's not much in a poodle. But that is not evolution. Hey, friends, think about this. Evolution is an information-gaining process. You know what we observe in science? Information-losing processes. See, if you're going to believe in evolution, information has to arise from matter over millions of years. New information arise, code systems arise. Remember what Dr. Werner Gitt said? In science, there is no known law of nature, no known process, no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate by itself in matter. Now, some people say, wait a minute. In school, we're also taught about mutations. It's not just natural selection, it's natural selection plus mutations. You've heard of mutations, haven't you? Poodles are full of them. Okay, that's true, they are. What about mutation? Dr. Lee Spetner, who's a fellow at Johns Hopkins University, said this: all point mutations, when you study them on the molecular level, turn out to, what's that next word? Reduce the genetic information, not to increase it. They reduce genetic information. Do you know how students are duped in public schools? Let me give you an example how they're duped. But the AIDS virus becomes resistant to drugs. Bacteria become resistant to antibiotics. You see, there's evolution. But you know what they're not told? What really happens at a molecular level. When you get down to the molecular level, not one instance of resistance in viruses or bacteria has anything to do with new information. It doesn't. Let me give you one example. There's many different reasons for this, but I'll just give you one example. There's a bacterium, H. pylori, that can cause stomach ulcers. Doctors give an antibiotic. The antibiotic is absorbed through the cell wall of the bacterium. There's a piece of the code of the DNA of the bacterium that produces an enzyme for the biochemistry of the bacterium. But that enzyme, when it comes into contact with the antibiotic, breaks it into substances that destroy the DNA of the bacterium and produce poisons to destroy it. But if that bacterium has a mutation that disrupts the code producing the enzyme, so it no longer produces the enzyme, it no longer breaks the antibiotic into poisons. Now it's become resistant because it lost the ability to do something, and so therefore the offspring from that bacteria are also going to be resistant, inheriting that same defective gene, but it has nothing to do with evolution. It's a loss of information. See, when students are explained this at a molecular level, their eyes are opened and they start to realize, we've been duped, we've been brainwashed, there is no evidence, this is not evolution. No, it's not. It all fits within a biblical context of a perfect world marred by sin, things running down, information losing. And you see, normally most mutations are edited out in the environment anyway because they're usually harmful. Some can be beneficial to a sort of a limited extent, but none of them are new information. They don't gain new information. But we protect mutations.